Welcome to Stories That Matter. Thank you for coming out on July 27th. Okay, our third story, and this is the last before the break, is from Jonathan Perpich. Come on up, Jonathan. JP.
What? I'm JP, and I wanted to start by thanking Lee and Stephen for letting me be a part of this event. I want to share a story with you about my relationship with my father. I am, and have always been, a drug addict and an alcoholic in the DNA. And my first encounter with alcohol was in the womb because my mother was an alcoholic. But my first taste of it came at a very, very young age. You see, my parents were renowned for throwing these parties, the Perpich parties, wild parties. And after one of these parties, the next morning, I was, I think, 4 years old at the time, very young. I wake up, and of course, I go in the living room. There's people crashed out on the couch and the floor. And I look around, and there's, empty cans and glasses and bottles all over the place. And I wanted to find out what all the hoopla was about. So I sneak around and I, taste a little bit. I took a little sample of one and tasted a little like medicine. One even tasted a little like candy, but most of them, they taste like gasoline. I couldn't figure it out. But what I noticed is the most of it was the beer cans. And so I went over and grabbed a half-empty beer can. I slugged it, trying to get it down before anybody noticed. And about halfway through, I realized that there was an object in my mouth. And it occurred to me that someone had converted the beer can into an ashtray over the course of the year. And you think I might have gotten the message then, but oh, no. No, there was more fun to come. And so my habit, my addiction grew and got worse and worse over the years. And I was terrified that I would become a hopeless alcoholic and an addict. And so I never said it out loud, not once. I was afraid that if I said those words that I would never be able to drink and drug again for the rest of my life. And so I kept it a secret from everyone, including myself, I guess. My father, My father was this remarkable human being, and when we were little and it was time for some level of punishment, my mother relegated the dirty work to my father. And so the routine was we'd get in trouble, he'd march us into our room, he'd close the door, he'd instruct us to, pull down our pants, turn around, bend over, but he would always lean over and whisper, "Listen, when I hit you, I want you to scream like you're in pain so your mom will hear." And then he would give us a couple of gentle whacks on the butt and we'd laugh. It actually became kind of a fun routine. But when I was 7 years old and I got caught stealing licorice from a local 7-Eleven, my mom had to come get me. She brought me home. "Wait till your father gets home." So Dad finally arrived, and she gave him the signal, and he said, "Well, you know the drill." So he marched me into my room, shut the door, said, "Go on." And I stood there, and I looked him directly in the eye, and I said, "Dad, if you're going to hit me, you're going to have to hit me in the face." And tears began to roll down his cheeks, and he just turned, and he walked out of the room. And later, he would like to tell the story this way. He would say, "Yeah, the kid wouldn't take his punishment, so he told me to hit him in the face, so I reeled up and I just whacked him in the jaw." And he would laugh and laugh like it was the funniest thing in the world. My dad was the king of dad jokes. So he went to college at USC, played football for their team, and he was actually the starting tight end in the Rose Bowl the year I was born, 1956. And he became a high school football coach. And so I was very concerned that at some point this high school football coach would discover that I was a hopeless alcoholic and an addict, and I was terrified that I would disappoint him. In my first year of high school, I lettered in 3 sports. I wanted to make him proud. And I loved sports. I lettered in football and wrestling and track. But at the end of that first year, I discovered theater. And I wanted to focus on theater. And so I decided I was going to quit 2 of those sports, wrestling and track, and I was going to become a thespian. Now, I was a little trepidatious about having to tell my father that I was going to quit these sports and become an actor. But I drummed up the courage one day, and I said, "Dad, this is what I'm going to do." And that man just wrapped his arms around me, and he said, "Son, you tell me when opening night is, and I will be in the front row." And that was my father. Well, he knew that the 3 of us kids, my older brother, my younger sister, and I partied quite a bit, but he just had no idea of the extent of my problem. And so I tried to put up a good front, and as the years went by, I went to college at UCLA, and I started to drink and drug more frequently, more heavily. And then I met my first wife, and she knew that I did drugs, but she didn't participate. And so I had to keep it a secret from her. And 6 months after we were married, she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. And after 4.5 years of surgeries and chemotherapy and radiation therapy, she died at the tender age of 37. And I was drinking and drugging the whole time. And so when she died, she was up at her mom's house, which was about a half an hour away from where we lived in Culver City. She decided to spend her last days there because she knew her husband couldn't take care of her. And so I went home to our house that day she died, and I dove into a very deep and black abyss. And it got ugly, and it got very dark. And a few years in, I'm online doing some crazy shit online, and I meet this woman, and she lives in Arizona, and I was in LA at the time, and she decided to leave her husband, her son, her daughter, and come live with me. Why not? I mean, I had my own television series, I had a maid, I was living the high life, lots of partying. And as soon as she moved in, things got bad. Or they got worse, much worse. And she quickly went through her divorce money and got sick from the drugs, and she went through several jobs, and about 3 years after she moved in, we're having a rough time of it, and we kind of were fighting, which didn't happen very often, but that day was pretty bad. And usually if she was angry at me, I could just wrap my arms around her and make everything okay, but she was having none of it this day. So anyway, I hit the wall. Literally put my fist through the wall, and I had never done that before, scared the crap out of both of us. And so it didn't occur to me later that by hitting the wall, I was speaking both metaphorically and literally. And something happened that day. I was on the phone with my father, my dear father, and I was whining and complaining about my life and how bad things had gotten and trying to con him out of some money so I could call my dealer. And Beth marches in the room and she says, "Why don't you just tell him the truth?" And she walked out. And I don't know how to tell you this. I don't even know how to say it, but these words just came out of my mouth. It wasn't like it was me who said it. They just came out, and the words were, "Dad, the truth is I have a drug and alcohol problem." And Beth came back in, and she said, "I'm so proud of you." And we cried together, and my dad was weeping with me. And he said, "I love you, son, and I want you to call your sister." My sister, who is the worst drunk I've ever known in my entire life, and I have known a few, I promise you. And as a matter of fact, this is the same sister who died just a year ago, strapped to a bed in Riverside County because of wet brain. But this is also the same sister who on that night had 9 years clean and sober. And I called her, and those words came out of my mouth again, and she said, "Well, now you're free." I said, "What?" She goes, "Yeah, you never have to drink or drug again for the rest of your life." I said, "How the hell does that work?" She said, "You'll find out." So I also called a friend of mine, And that same friend, 6 months earlier, had called me and said, there are people who love you, JP, and they want to save your life. They're afraid you're going to die. And so we want to send you to treatment. We'll pay for your treatment. And I wasn't ready, so I declined. But that night, after being on the phone with my dad and with my sister, I called him and I said, is that offer still on the table? And he said, oh yeah. As a matter of fact, we want to sweeten the pot. We think you didn't go the first time because you were worried about Beth and not being able to pay the bills, so we're going to pay your bills and pay for your treatment. And people loved me that much. And so 25 years ago, I entered Tarzana Treatment Center in a place outside of Los Angeles. I spent 30 days there, and I left, and I haven't had a drink or a drug since, and thank you. Thank you. And started my new life. And it has been indescribable. Today, I share my life. I need to take a moment. I share my life with this lady, this beautiful human being named Cynthia, who many of you know because she was in the last storytelling event. A woman who is so far beyond my wildest dreams. A woman who loves me for who I am and not for who she wants me to be. A woman who brought this remarkable creature into our lives, this beautiful young lady named Lucy, who is her daughter and now thinks of me as her parent. And today, my God, I am richer than I have ever been in my life. And I have known abject poverty. Can I afford the second taco at Jack in the Box? And I have known great wealth. Should I get a limo or hire a driver? But today, because of my relationship with my father and the people in my life, I get to just relax and trust the current. And I remember being at my father's service, and there were so many people there who loved him and talked about what an incredible man he was. There were people from way back, before USC, people he knew at USC, people who had just met him 2 weeks earlier on the golf course, who came to his service to say how much they loved this man that they had just met. And I remember sitting there thinking, I got to be his son. And when I went down to visit him, in that, after I'd heard that he'd had the brain tumor, I got the call that he had lapsed into a coma, and I get down there, and my brother's there. It was his 50th birthday. And he said, I can't deal with this, man. I can't watch this anymore. And so he took off for Mexico. My sister was there, and she said, I can't watch this. And so she split. So it was just my father and I in that beautiful hospice room overlooking the valley in San Diego, and I got to hold his head in my hand. And I got to be present with him, which I could never do before. And I got to kiss him on the lips when he took his last breath, and that was a gift. And when I heard that he was sick, and I raced back down to Del Mar, and I came in the house, and I collapsed in his lap, and I was weeping, and I said, Dad, I cannot do this without you. What am I going to do? And he said, son, we all have to go sometime. I'm just glad that I'm leaving someone like you behind. And I got to hear those words from my father. Thank you.
Hard to follow that. One of the things that JP is most proud of is the 25 years clean and sober. So, he would, if he had an animal, he would want to be an owl. He thinks he's a bear, but he'd want to be an owl for the wisdom and all that kind of stuff that goes along with being an owl. I don't know, but we'll have to see. His definition of happiness is a word I never heard before. Ataraxy. Am I saying that right? Ataraxy. Anybody ever heard that word before? Ataraxy? No? I had to look it up. I had no idea what it is. So, a state of mind that is characterized by peace and serenity and untroubled by worry. So I hope you get that, and I hope all of us get that, you know.